What's happening, everybody? O'Neill, Paul Browne here to break down UFC Paris. The UFC is in Paris. There's a nice ring to that, Paul. Another solid card. Renato Moicano, Benoit Saint Denis, your main event. Nasruddin Imavov, Brendan Allen is your co-main event. Maybe not the star-studded kind of alignment of fighters that we normally would have seen, obviously, for a big Paris card, but nonetheless, a solid card from top to bottom. And we were just talking about that as well, Paul, before we came on. It is a pretty solid card. There's a lot of good matchups here. A lot of the French fighters in action as well, from the very start of the night to the very end. So it's always a good rapturous kind of audience, a good buzz in the arena when the French get in for some fights. And I'm sure it'll be no different on Saturday night. And you're looking forward to it, I assume.
Yeah, that's the Accor Arena, isn't it? Is that the one that
That's
holds
right.
20,000, or is that the slightly smaller one?
It's it's in the Accor Arena now as well. Yeah, so it's a pretty decent. It'll be 20,000, and you know, you like I said, you hear all 20,000 of those fans whenever they're in full voice.
Yeah, Jesus, for any of the shows like the UFC events, obviously, and then there's been a few PFL events on over there over the last couple of years as well, and they come out in force, don't they? That like I saw someone tweeting today, I think it was, and I can't remember who it was, but they were saying like the Dublin crowds and the Paris crowds are by far and away the best MMA crowds in all of the world. So you'd expect it to be the same this week. I mean, even though, as you said, there's no like Cyril Gane or Francis Ngannou topping the card, or a Cedric Doumbé or anything like that, but there are plenty of French fighters on the card. There's a couple of fights at the top of the card that are going to have consequences at the top end of the rankings in a couple of divisions. So, you know, an interesting card overall.
Yeah, let's get into it here real quick. Main event, Renato Moicano taking on Benoit Saint Denis. You know, Moicano's been on a hell of a run there recently, Paul. Obviously, picking up wins over Brad Riddell, Drew Dober, Jalen Turner. Heading into this fight with Benoit Saint Denis, and look at his kind of his actions outside of the cage have kind of drawn more attention. His post-fight interviews, his podcast, all of that stuff. But, you know, it's been a perfect storm for him recently coming into this fight. You know, it's important to be getting wins inside the cage. People are saying his name. People are looking forward to his fights. He's got that personality that kind of draws fans and draws attention in. And he's got a nice step up in competition here. For me, with Moicano, Paul, I don't know whether you feel the same. It's kind of like he has got to this threshold before and fail. So it's a big moment for him on enemy soil to kind of come in against a guy like Benoit Saint Denis, prove that, you know, he can kind of, you know, move up the rankings. You know, he's 10, I believe, right now, or outside the top 10, but he can kind of bust into the top 10 and start making a charge for the title, or at least the top 5. I think the title with his level of skill set might be a little bit a stretch too far for him. What are your thoughts on Moicano coming in here? We'll get into how the matchup is in just a bit.
He's done a brilliant job of making everybody know and understand like who he is. Do you know what I mean? Because beforehand, it would have been sort of a name that you recognize, but maybe I've seen him fight before, or maybe I haven't, kind of thing. You know, not a very memorable, you know, style of fighting. There's nothing flash about him, but now everybody knows who Renato Moicano is because there's just clips of him all over social media. After a fight night, you might not even watch his fight back, but you'll sure as hell see his post-fight interview. Hey guys, let me tell you something. You know, he's just going off on Joe Hogan. So he's a good impression. That I don't know if it's a bit racist.
That's very good. That is very
I'll have to ask me missus. She's Brazilian. I'll get the okay off her. I've got it in there. So
yeah.
But like he's done a great job of making people care about who he is, and that's a huge part of fighting. Like something I'm always saying to fighters that I like. Obviously, I train with a lot of people, and I know everyone on the domestic scene. You have to make people give a shit about who you are, not just about or not just by what you do in the cage. But if you want to actually make a career in the sport, people need to care who you are. And Moicano's done a brilliant job of that. Like, you know what I mean? Because I've only seen like a couple of his fights, I have to say, even though he's ranked. I'm looking at the rankings there. He's number 11 in the rankings. He's actually ahead of Benoit Saint Denis. So like he's done a great job. And for me, I don't think he's going to go to a title. I think he's possibly a little bit just climbing past his peak years now, and he knows it as well, and he's just trying to maximize his earning potential over this next kind of year or two and get into some high profile fights. And look where it's brought him. He's headlining in front of probably 20,000 fans this weekend. I thought they were going to pair him off with Paddy Pimblett. I thought that was a bit of a no-brainer. The two guys wanted it, and they were even saying, hey, why don't you put us on as tough coaches? I mean, something like that would have been just, why not? Like, I can't think of a reason not to do something like that. They're in and around where each other are in the rankings. They both have the capacity to put on some great TV together. It would have been hilarious. But they've gone with this fight instead. But like I said, it's a great opportunity for Moicano to fight in front of a packed crowd in France. I don't know how much chance he has of winning it. I suppose we can get into that in a minute. But he's done a great job, like I said, of just making people give a shit about him.
Absolutely. And, you know, it is very, very important. I agree with you 100%. He's coming in against Benoit Saint Denis, who, you know, we talked about Renato Moicano meeting a certain threshold and not being able to kind of get over the final hurdle, maybe breaking through into the top 10 or the top 5 of the division. It's kind of the threshold that Benoit Saint Denis is kind of at himself, Paul, in terms of, you know, he got a challenge against Dustin Poirier. Did very, very well in round 1 in that fight. Obviously, just lost being via knockout in round 2, but you know, definitely some positives to take from that. But you look at his run before that, I remember seeing Benoit Saint Denis all the way back in Brave. I remember looking at him and seeing that this guy is well rounded. I'd expect to see him in the UFC. When we saw him coming into the UFC, obviously, you know, we talked about it a lot when me and Harry were doing the podcast about his debut in the UFC was at welterweight against Alessio Zaleski, and got absolutely beaten from pillar to post. I think the ref did a scandalous job in that, not stopping it sooner. But ever since they moved down to lightweight, it's been win after win after win after win. And of course, look at you, no shame losing against a guy like Dustin Poirier, but he has a big, big chance here. The UFC are backing him, putting him in this main event slot. I think a win here is really going to propel him up the division and set up a really big fight for him next. And curious to hear your thoughts on Benoit Saint Denis.
Yeah, like they gave him the Poirier match, didn't they? And I think he was ranked 12 at the time where he is now. And Poirier, I think, was ranked number 3. So they gave him the fight, and we're seeing a lot of that. Like Umar Nurmagomedov got the fight with Corey Sandhagen. There's guys way high up in the rankings, you know, defending their position by taking fights against dangerous fighters who are sitting outside the top 10. It's happened quite a bit in a few of the divisions over the last while. And fair play to Poirier. I love the way he was kind of justifying it. He was saying, look, you can't sit on your ranking. You got to defend it. Like he put a lot on the line by taking on Benoit Saint Denis in that one. And it nearly went horribly. Like he was really struggling with the output and the power of Saint Denis in that opening round. Obviously, Saint Denis, there was a big deal made of the fact that he had staff and, you know, he faded badly. Stylistically, like, part of it is down to that too. He's recklessly aggressive at times, you know, and it pays off for him a lot. But, you know, against a top tier fighter like Poirier, who was able to sort of figure that out, was able to walk him onto some shots. We saw, you know, how you can you can pay for those mistakes. I don't think Moicano is in that Poirier kind of level, particularly when it comes to the striking. So, yeah, I can't see that same kind of thing happening again this weekend. But Benoit Saint Denis, like you said, he made that change to 155 pounds and he won 5 in a row. And he looked exceptional, really, on a lot of those. He looks like that's the perfect weight for him. He did fight in Brave a lot at welterweight, and you know that you mentioned that UFC debut when he took an awful hiding, but he's looked brilliant at 155 pounds so far. For breaking further up into division, I'm just looking at the list and the rankings here. The fighters ahead of them in the top 10 are the likes of Max Holloway, Rafael Fiziev, you've got Gamrot, Beneil Dariush, then you've got Chandler Hooker. There's not a lot of names there that I'd fancy either of this weekend's 2 main event fighters to overcome. I mean, you might look at Beneil Dariush and Gamrot are maybe a little past their best, so they might be ripe for the picking. Michael Chandler as well. Dan Hooker would be a very exciting fight, and I suppose they'd be competitive fights. But then after that, you're looking at the superstars of the sport too. Like Holloway's in the rankings, of course, but we don't know if he's staying at lightweight. Fiziev, I think, is just going to have too much on a technical level for either of them on the feet. And then you've got Poirier, we saw was a step too far for him. Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan. So the names just get scarier and scarier as you go up. But
And the
there
thing
are
about it is
fighters there.
with Benoit Saint-Denis, Paul, I think, you know, it's important for us to remember he's only 28 years of age. You know what I mean? He's been around for a while, but still only coming into his prime. Will have learned, I feel, a lot of lessons off that Dustin Poirier fight. And I think he'll bring those lessons into this fight with Moicano, to be honest. Look, you were talking about him at the level of Dustin Poirier, and the way I could describe it is that his toughness got him to that fight with Dustin Poirier, his ability to take shots and move forward and with reckless abandon. But it also was his detriment when he went in there against Dustin Poirier. So, like you said, it, you hit the nail on the head. You just cannot be that reckless against high-level opposition. So I'm very excited to see him coming in here. And I don't think, you know, I think we'll see him probably a little bit more tidy, but I think the crux of his game with that forward pressure and, you know, that wildness in exchange in the pocket is something that I feel we'll see in this fight. And it's something that I think will suit him in this fight with Renato Moicano. Obviously, I feel, you know, Moicano would have the advantage in the grappling department, but can he get Benoit Saint-Denis down? That's a big question I have coming in. When you're looking at this fight overall, what are the big questions that you're asking yourself before these two guys throw down?
Yeah, well, that's the big thing I would be saying as well. Like, you watch how he takes how Moicano took down Jalen Turner in one of his recent fights, and you know he made that look easy. But this guy he's in against this weekend is a different beast altogether. You know, a strong competition judo background, just a very physically strong grappler who I've been impressed with. Now, it's not that he's impossible to take down. We saw Matt Frivola lift him up and slam him to the mat in that last fight. But what I liked about him is that he immediately goes on the front foot. He starts digging underhooks. He starts wrestling up straight away. He's not an easy guy to pin down. Moicano pinned down Jalen Turner and beat the brakes off him. Another thing that I saw was really interesting in that fight was Jalen Turner's a southpaw, just like Benoit Saint-Denis. Saint-Denis walks forward and he throws that left body kick. It's ferocious. He puts a lot into it, and it's like a baseball bat or a hurley cracking off somebody's body. Now, Jalen Turner walked straight out at the start of that fight against Moicano from the southpaw position. Now, he's a different shape of fighter, a different build. The first thing he did was throw a kick to the body. He threw two of them in the first 10 seconds, and he pretty much folded Moicano with it, you know. So I'm sure Benoit Saint-Denis will have looked at that and just said, right, there it is, that open stance. If I can step my lead foot outside, I can absolutely cause damage to that body, because he looked a little bit soft in the middle in that moment. Now, he came back and he won the fight, but he was in real trouble there for a moment. So there's things like that are questions for me from Moicano. What he does to people to get his victories, can he do it to Benoit Saint-Denis? I think it's a big ask.
I definitely think it's a big ask as well. I think, you know, the power advantage for me goes to Benoit Saint-Denis. I think, you know, the pressure of the French crowd and how much that's going to kind of gee up, I think someone like Benoit Saint-Denis, I think this moment has been made for him, and I think he's going to take it with flying colors, or take it with two hands, I believe. So, I mean, I think we're both on the same kind of wavelength. I think we're both leaning towards Benoit Saint-Denis here, but, you know, with Moicano, you never can rule him out. 5-round fight. We'll see how Benoit might withstand the pressure that Moicano might bring with his grappling, maybe in the late third, fourth,
and
or
the cardio,
fifth.
Ian, the cardio as well. Remember that last fight we saw, like, he complained about a health issue causing it, but that we don't know for definite that was it. Maybe he just, you know, went too hard in the paint and kind of spent too much energy. You know, this is like you mentioned, a 5-round fight.
Yeah, indeed. Like, and you know, I always, you know, someone who's tried, true, and tested like Moicano and that kind of level, main event late in the stages of the fight, you know, he's going to be strong. But Benoit Saint-Denis, yeah, it's curious. I think this fight answers a lot of questions. Did he go hell for leather to try and surprise Poirier? Did he go hell for leather because he did have staph infection and he knew he probably only had maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes in him anyway? Very, very interesting to see there. But I'm looking forward to that fight. It's going to be good, be interesting. The co-main event, Nasruddin Imavov versus Brendan Allen. What do you think of these two lads? I mean, I'm not sold on either one of these guys, if I'm honest. Like, Nasruddin Imavov, I've been looking up, I've seen him live in the flesh a couple of times now at this stage, and he does everything okay without doing anything excellently well, in my opinion. And I think it can say the same about Brendan Allen, but maybe kind of give him a little bit more of a grappling advantage hit there. But his striking has come on a little bit too. But two guys that are, you know, trudging their way up through the middleweight division, and this is, you know, the perfect kind of matchup for me, and who's going to get the next step into maybe top 5 competition. What do you think of these two boys and how these this fight kind of matches up, Paul?
Yeah, I'd kind of echo your sentiment there on the two of them. Imavov in particular, I watch him and I'm like, there's nothing jumping off the page at me here. Like, there's nothing he's doing that's convincing me that he has world championship potential in him. The last win against Jared Cannonier, he had Cannonier rocked, but I think it was a bit of an early stoppage. Like when I watch it back, and it's, you know, Cannonier has every right to be aggrieved. He was scarpering around the cage a little bit to get away, but you know, he was still there. Like, maybe give him another 5 or 10 seconds to see could Imavov actually capitalize and land some more blows on him, rather than just look at that moment of him, you know, scrambling for survival and thinking that's enough to stop the fight. And then the win before that, I think, was a split decision or majority decision. So the one before that was he was beaten by Sean Strickland. So, you know, he hasn't convinced me that he can compete at the highest level in that division. And that division's in a weird spot. So you've got the champ, Dricus du Plessis, now a newish champion in there after years of Adesanya dominating the division. And then you've got the experienced names like the former champs. You've got Strickland and Adesanya and Robert Whittaker hogging up those spots just behind him. So, you know, Whittaker's matched. Strickland, they're talking about, is going to be getting that next title shot. Adesanya, we don't know what's going to happen with him. But then there's this group of fighters that, you know, you've got Imavov and you've got Brendan Allen in it, and you've also got Caio Borralho in there as well. So that's interesting. You know, Jared Cannonier now has just been sort of scraped out of that top 5 by Caio Borralho, who I think has probably got the most potential out of that whole group.
I would agree.
Yeah, and Brendan Allen and Nasruddin Imavov are sort of floating in and around there. This fight is going to eliminate one of them from that picture, one of them from that talk of, you know, who can be looked at as a champion going forward. As you said, Brendan Allen probably has that little bit extra in regards his grappling ability. 5 of his last 7 wins were rear naked chokes. He's really, really good at getting to the back. And we've seen fighters like Aljamain Sterling's another good example of that, you know, just always manages to find his way onto your back. And even when he got into like fights with the likes of Piotr Jan, guys at the very top of the division, he could still do it. So the question for me would be, can Brendan Allen still do that? He's been doing it to the guys he's been beating, but now that we're looking at the upper echelons of the middleweight division, can he still do it? You know, so
yeah, you're coming in there against a guy like Nasruddin Imavov, who's great counter grappling. You know what I mean? One thing I'll give Imavov credit for whenever I watch him fight is he does have an ability to dictate where the fight goes. It's very rare that I've seen him, you know, struggle for position or anything. Like, he seems to always be in control of where the fight is taking place and where the fight is happening. And I think, for me, that's going to be the key for him getting the win here against a guy like Brendan Allen, who I feel is going to want to close the distance and test out the grappling. It might be a test of wills. Obviously 3 5s here, so, you know, we're not going to see any action in the championship rounds, which might benefit Allen more than Imavov, who has had a tendency to tire. But I think for Brendan Allen, like I said, what's an ability to control a fight? You know, it's obviously controlling whether it's on the feet, whether you want to take the fight down, but it's also controlling the timing, the rhythm, the speed a fight takes place. And I think that's something that Brendan Allen is going to have to get in at Imavov here, and he's going to have to try and work a pace that works for him and create those scrambles in the grappling exchanges. And ultimately, you know, one of those scrambles could lead to a back take. You know, you get a back take and you land damage from the back, even if you don't get a submission out, Paul. That's what the judges are looking for. So, you know, all there's looking is for 3 moments in 3 different rounds here for Brendan Allen to get that dominant position in the grappling. And, you know, he can go to work and he could win those rounds. But this is the type of fight, I don't know how you feel about it, is that this has decision written all over it, to be honest, in my opinion. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, it's very likely that they could be really evenly matched here. Like I'm looking at the two of them on paper and then watching their fights back, and it's like, I'm still not convinced on making a pick either way. Do you know what I mean? There's, as we said, the rear naked choke or the back taking abilities of Brendan Allen could be an X factor, but that could be nullified too. So, yeah, I mean, the last thing either of them needs is an uninspiring close decision victory. That, you know, for one of them to put their hands up and be looked at like, oh, this guy now, yeah, he could be the one that steps into that group, like Caio Borralho had. Like, he didn't finish Jared Cannonier, but he damn near finished him, and people were looking at that thinking, okay, now we got something here. Yeah, let's move this guy forward. So one of them needs that. If it's an uninspiring sort of uneventful 3-round decision, I mean, yeah, it's not going to do any of them any favors.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be that, or more. I mean, hopefully we've put the curse on it. Hopefully it'll be an absolute fucking banger now, and we'll be good. I'm leaning towards Imamov. I think he's going to be able to keep that distance control. I think he'll be landing more impactfully on the feet. And I think that's going to take a little bit of confidence away from Allen. But like I said, I think the start of this fight is going to kind of dictate where the rest of it goes. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. Moving on down to the 145-pound division, William Gomis versus Joanderson Brito. I mean, this has potential banger written all over it as well. Gomis a slick striker. Joanderson throws heavy at all costs. And, you know, those two styles, you know, they clash. Who's going to work for? Is it going to be Brito who can close the distance and get those heavy shots on Gomis, or is it going to be Gomis controlling that distance? I think, you know, we've seen Gomis flashing in and out of Cage Warriors, Paul, and we've been familiar with him for a little while. Very, very smooth, slick striker, and a very good striker on the back foot too. Joanderson Brito does his best work, obviously moving forward, lunging, throwing a lot of shots. So, I mean, will Gomis be able to set up his shots, walk Joanderson Brito on? Will Brito be able to cut off the cage and land his big shots? I think that's the story of this fight for me. How do you see it going down?
Yeah, I mean, both guys are on big winning streaks, or, you know, decent runs. Gomis was 3-0 now in the UFC, and he's going to have that French crowd kind of rooting for him too. So it's always interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. 7 TKO victories, you know, and at featherweight, like that's a kind of a decent amount of finishes he's got there. Like, he's putting guys away, and he's dealing with anyone they're putting in front of him. Brito has some good wins though, and if you look at his record, I mean, obviously he has that win over Jack Shore. Now, I know that was the one with the cut on the shin, and they were a bit pissed off, weren't they, shaking his team, that the fight was stopped because of
he
cut
looked
on the
savage
shin.
in that fight though, didn't he? Like, I mean, look
He
at the
did,
cut on
like,
the cut on the shin was unfortunate, and you know, I wasn't too pleased about the stoppage either, but that cut was caused by damage, and that was damage that was thrown by Joanderson Brito, and he looked like a scary individual in that fight, and I think that's what makes this fight so intriguing to me.
yeah, like, the performance there was something to be just mindful of. Like, he was really looking the part. He looking further down his record, he has wins over good names. He beat Andre Fili. His first UFC win came against Andre Fili. He was no easy day out. Shepa Mascaral before he got into the UFC, and Diego Lopez on the Contender Series. Like, this guy's a problem. Do you know what I mean? He's on a 5-fight win streak now. After he lost one fight in the UFC, he's on a 5-fight win streak. All of those have been finishes. So you were right. This could well be the fight of the night. Both of these guys are picking up finishes. They're picking up stoppages. Plenty of TKOs on both records. So, and like you said, a real interesting stylistic matchup. One guy's going to be probably trying to play the matador against the other. So
yeah, exactly.
I think that's the one I'm probably going to be outside of the main event. This is the one I'm going to be more excited about than that co-main, you know.
Me too. I'm very intrigued about that one. Moving on down the card again, Kevin Juice is back in action in the welterweight division against Brian Battle. We seen Juice obviously in his debut. He took on Kiefer Crosby in Sydney, Australia, got the win there. Returned again and picked up another solid win over Song Kinan. Comes in here against Brian Battle. You know, Brian Battle for me, very hit and miss so far in his UFC career, although he has been on a decent run lately, but undefeated, I guess. Did he lose his last one?
He's 11 of his last 13 he's won. Like, so it's a decent record. But the thing with it is, there's nobody of real name value on that list of opponents that he's conquered either. Do you know what I mean? So it's like,
Fakhretdinov is the biggest test, and that's the one that he failed. And I think he's coming in here against another tough test. Like Juice is he's a monster in there, Paul.
Yeah, he looked ferocious, didn't he, against Kiefer Crosby that time? Like, he just overpowered him, and he looks a real handful. So it is a tough fight for Brian Battle.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I'd be leaning towards Juice in that one, and I think that's one that will get the crowd going. I mean, looking at the rest of the main card here, let's talk about Morgan Sharia versus Gabriel Miranda. What have you made of Morgan Sharia's move over to the UFC and a couple of fights that he's had so far? He's been looking mighty impressive since the move over there, and obviously he was very unlucky when he went in there against Sheppy Marscal and lost a close split decision last time out. Be very interesting to see what he kind of brings to the table here against Gabriel Miranda. Your thoughts on this one, Paul?
Yeah, delighted to see him back. I love a bit of the last pirate. I was lucky enough now to work in and around him in one of his final Cage Warriors fights as well. So I kind of got to know him a little bit. He's a good guy. He's fun and just an exceptionally exciting fighter. The UFC debut against Akini was brilliant. Like the kicks to the body, he stabbed him with that teep and folded him, put him in reverse, and then when he was crumpling to the mat, he ran over and booted him into the body again, and that was the end of it. Like he was trying to kick him halfway across Paris. So it was an exceptional performance, I thought, and he's really exciting to watch. He's what you call a pretty fighter in that everything he does is tidy and technical, but dangerous too. Just easy on the eye, really exciting style. Of course, we saw him in there with Vucenic and Paul Hughes, didn't we? And I got the chance to talk to Paul Hughes there a couple of weeks ago about that as well. And he has fond memories of those tests. They were brilliant fights. Now, Charrier lost to both guys, so he probably comes out at the bottom of that sort of trio when it comes to overall results and performance. But that was a really interesting kind of storyline in the Cage Warriors featherweight division, whenever it was 2-3 years back. So, as me and Paul talked about, it's kind of helped all of them move on to that next level, having those repeated fights against each other, three fighters of a really high level. And we're seeing it in his UFC performance. He belongs there, doesn't he? He just looks like he's at home in that cage. He's absolutely at that level, as is Vucenic and as is Paul Hughes,
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And there's no easy fights in the UFC, and obviously 1-on-1 for Charrier. I think he has a good winnable fight here against Miranda. I think the UFC know what they're doing. It'll be up to him to kind of drive on and get that win in front of his home crowd.
Well, there's one interesting wrinkle about Miranda. He's in 2 years. So like last year he had one fight and he won by submission in 59 seconds. And he hadn't fought for a year before that. So in 2 years, he's had 59 seconds of action in the cage. So like, yeah, it's a tough ask for him coming in there against Charrier in front of the Paris crowd.
It is. That's where you want to be if you're Morgan Charrier now, just coming in and putting the pressure on straight away. And that adrenaline dump, I'm sure, would come fairly quickly if Miranda was found on the back foot eating shots early days. So yeah, that is a very interesting wrinkle, and it's one that I always look at as well, where that's an asterisk over that guy and seeing obviously not taking the damage, but not getting that in cage time either is going to be something that we'll have to look out for in that fight. Faris Saim versus Matt Frivola. Very smart matchmaking here to open up the main card, Paul. I think with both of these guys' style, like the way to move, similar enough to what we were talking about with Gomis and Brito here. Both of these guys like to move forward. Both like to land heavy. I just want to talk about Saim for a minute. A guy who I was quite unsure about when I had seen him in the early days in the UFC. Obviously lost to that round one by submission to Terence McKinney. But since then, wins over a couple of really good names in the division. And, the likes of Figlak, the likes of Jai Herbert, Claudio Pujeles in his last fight. It's a good test here against Matt Frivola, but he's been looking good, and he's been kind of getting better and leveling up each time we've seen him in there. Only 27 years of age, still got plenty of time to grow, still has a bit of a ceiling to kind of get up to as well, I think. And I think this is the perfect test at the perfect time to see where he's at for a fighter, with a guy like Matt Frivola, who's been around the block, who's been in there against some high level competition himself, and a guy who's willing to go in there, bite down on the gum shield and throw down in fights. I think that will kind of suit Saim coming into this fight.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Frivola doesn't stand on ceremony either. He's a real handful, and he'll bring a fight. So he's getting a really prime spot here as well, opening the main card. He's won, I think it's 5 of his last 6 fights, and he's the hometown fighter really here. So they're throwing him in there with someone who's gonna be a will and dance partner Frivola is, he got knocked out, but it was last November was his last fight, and he got knocked out by that head kick by Benoit Saint-Denis. But I was really impressed with, how he fought. As I said, mentioned earlier, he lifted up Saint-Denis and slammed him down to the mat. Saint-Denis created a scramble, and on the break he was backing out and he just ate a big head kick, and that was the end of him. But it was a very interesting fight overall, because they were going at it hammer and tongs, and I think he's going to bring the same to Zaim this Saturday night. So as I said, Zaim has won quite a few now, quite a few of his last bunch of fights. He's chasing a finish. He hasn't had a finish in quite a while, so I think this would be the night to do it. If you can open up the main card and maybe do something similar to Frivola that Benoit Saint-Denis is, he could be off to the races.
Yeah, or with Frivola too, like I'm thinking you kind of sprung a memory on me there of Frivola in that fight. I mean, after getting knocked out, is Frivola going to be too interested in standing and banging with this guy either? Will he try to close the distance? Will he try to put him on his back? We've seen Zaim kind of struggle off his back in past fights as well, so it'll be interesting to see what Frivola does there. I'm going to brush through some of the fights, and then we'll kind of run back, Paul, and just kind of discuss them real quickly. Ian Kutalaba versus Ivan Ersan in the 205-pound division is the prelim headliner. Umar Sy, who's the brother, I believe, of Sadibou Sy from the PFL. He's undefeated, coming off to the Contender Series and fighting Dawon Jung. Looking forward to seeing him now. He looks a right good prospect. Ludovic Klein versus Roosevelt Roberts in the 155-pound division. Taylor Lapilus versus Vince Morales at 135. We've got Aileen Perez versus Daria Zelensikova.
Something like that, Ian. Just keep going.
We're going to go with that. Daniel Perez versus Vitor Altamirano at 125. Nora Cornhole versus Jacqueline Calvcante at 135. Chris Duncan, Scotland's own, opens up the card at 155 versus Bulaj Oki. Out of all the fights I just mentioned, Paul, I'll let you pick out a couple of ones that are really intriguing to you. If I could kind of say myself, a fighter that has really fallen under the radar and a guy that I'm very interested in at the minute is Ludovic Klein, who has picked up a couple of good wins and is looking really good in doing so as well. And I'm very interested to see how he does in this fight. He's coming in against Roosevelt Roberts, who, has had some good performances and some bad performances, but, a very interesting run that Ludovic Klein is on right now.
Yeah, I'm looking at the list of fighters he's beaten: Mason Jones, Ignacio Bahamondes, Thiago Moises. Like that's a pretty decent level of fighter to be getting your hand raised against. Like Mason Jones is outstanding. I've seen Mason Jones fight in the flesh so many times, and we've been blown away by just how dominant he is over anyone that Cage Warriors put in front of him. And for Ludovic Klein to look, I know it was a close fight, but he got the win over him. Bahamondes, we're seeing, is an absolute killer. Like, there's some names on there, and Roberts has lost 3 of his last 5, so I think they're putting someone in front of him now that he can just go out and rinse and repeat and do the exact same thing too,
Yeah, 100%. Anything else that tickles your fancy, Paul, on the undercard?
Yeah, a couple of decent ones there. I mean, Umar Sy is, as you mentioned, he's unbeaten. He's 10-0. He's won his last 3 by round 1 finish. This is his UFC debut, isn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
So
we would have seen him. No, we've seen him once before. We've seen him come in. Wasn't he supposed to fight on the Contender Series or something? And it didn't come in, but he came in and took on Tuko Tukas and won by rear naked choke in round 1. But I remember seeing that fight, and he had ferocious striking as well. So, he's a big lump of a fella like his brother. And, in another winnable fight here, I think.
Yeah, I've watched a couple of his fights, and he's pretty well rounded, and a decent athlete, and he looks pretty good kind of anywhere the fight goes. As I mentioned, he's 10-0. 4 knockouts, 4 submissions. So, that kind of speaks to his well-roundedness. The guy he's in against, Dawon Jung, is he's lost his last 3, and he hasn't got a win over anyone decent. So he's basically just being positioned in here to make this fella look good.
No, let's say it as it is. He's being produced as a sacrificial lamb in this fight, isn't he, to the French audience?
Yeah, he's been offered up to the Paris crowd, the poor man. God bless him. If he comes out here and gets his hand raised, I think, I haven't seen any betting odds, but I'm going to imagine this guy's probably the biggest underdog of the night.
He'll go fucking full on Caelan Loughran if he gets the win, and then give it all to the French crowd. So Yeah,
Oh
100%.
lad, there's a decent fight in the middle of the card here. Taylor Lapilus is taking on Vince Morales, both of them in
Yeah,
their second sort of UFC stint. This is Morales' second UFC debut, you know, and he went viral there just a few weeks back. Peruvian necktie finish, over who was it? A Hunter Azure. So
yeah.
you know, anyone that gets a Peruvian necktie, yeah. You have my
It's a Paul
you have my
Browne seal of
support going
approval
forward. Yeah.
there.
That's a brutal submission. And of course, we saw Taylor Lapilus beating Kayla Loughran, and he had a good run in the UFC way back when. I think he was 4-2, wasn't he, in his first run? And I think he's 2-1 now in the second. So he's doing all right for himself, you know, and he'll have the Paris crowd behind him. So I think that's a relatively high level bantamweight fight it's slap
Like
bang in the
it.
middle of the undercard.
Yeah, I like that too. And I mean, look at obviously we've seen Lapilus come in, get the win over Kalen. I lost to Fard Bashrat, no shame, and that wins over Cody Stamen, and another solid test in Vince Morales. But a test I think that he's going to be capable of passing as well, and which will drive him on into the division as well. Shout out to Chris Duncan as well, obviously opening up the card. You know, coming off of a loss over Manuel Torres. You know, he'll be disappointed in that. He'll want to come back out here. And I think he's got a good chance here against Bola Ajoki. 9-1 is Oki. Timothy Kumba was a split decision win on his UFC debut. He came off the Contender Series in 2023, as did Duncan, I think, the year previously in 2022. But a good clash. Look, when you know what you're going to get when you see Chris Duncan in there. You know he'll take one to throw on, as the lad says, Paul, and it should be an exciting fight to kick us off.
Yeah, I watched little snippets of Oki fighting, and he looks interesting as well. You know, he's got good boxing, really good fast hands, combinations, body shots. So I think we could be in for an exciting curtain jerker there.
Absolutely. And look, it'll be exciting night overall in the Acer Arena in Paris. Always a fun card to look down upon. Obviously, no Cyril Gane, no big stars, but plenty of good matchups and plenty of narratives that will be created. Obviously, when this card is kind of all said and done. We'll be back next week.
What's happening with Cyril Gane, by the way? Do you have any idea what's
He was
going on
supposed
there?
to be fighting Volkov. I thought it was on this card, but when I checked, it cancelled and the fizzled out bouts. I don't know when it was supposed to be, but that I think he was obviously Tom Aspinall was trying to fight him as well. I'm going to check him
He was
out
on a
here
movie
now.
set, wasn't he? And he turned the
Yeah, and
fight down because he was filming a movie.
Yeah, and then I would have thought. Look, I honestly think the fact that he's not on this card would tell me that he's in the bad books of the UFC for one reason or another. He's been matched with Alexander Volkov. That was supposed to happen on October 26th. It's now cancelled, so who knows when that's going to go down again. And I mean, that Volkov fight was a rematch of a fight that took a decision where Gane won as well. So I mean, I've had my opinions on Cyril Gane. I completely out of him. I want to say that I fraud checked Cyril Gane before fraud checking was a thing in mixed martial arts. Before he fought John Jones, I never was too gone on him. Never was gone on the fact where he was a guy who wanted to call his shots. Get in there, fight these guys, earn, like you said, like Dustin Poirier did, earn your ranking. So, a win over Alexander Volkov is not going to do too much. I think the fight we all want to see down the line is him versus Tom Aspinall. That'll be a super fight. But yeah, he's missing out on this one. Benoit Saint Denis gets the spotlight in Paris in the main event. Like I said, we'll be back next week. We'll break down that card from top to tail. We'll also be back to check out next week's UFC card and some other MMA action as well. For Paul Browne, O'Neill, enjoy the fights this weekend, and we'll chat to you soon.